It started with a wedding. Not mine, of course. That was nearly 30 years ago. No, this was my daughter's wedding, Elena, my youngest. She looked luminous that day, floating down the garden aisle in her mother-of-pearl gown, her cheeks flushed with a joy I vaguely remembered. The music, the lavender-scented air, the way her eyes locked with her fiancé's, it was all perfect. Too perfect, maybe. I sat beside my husband, Alan, who was dabbing his eyes with a napkin more out of obligation than emotion. We've been married since 1994. He still calls me Han, still mows the lawn every Saturday morning, and still forgets my birthday once every 3 years. We're not unhappy, but we're not much of anything anymore. A rhythm, a habit, a well-worn pair of shoes that no longer fit quite right, but you can't bear to throw out. Across the aisle, in the sun-drenched rows of chairs, I spotted someone I hadn't seen in over 2 decades. I blinked to make sure it was really him, Daniel, my stepbrother. Well, technically, ex-stepbrother. My mother married his father for a brief, chaotic stretch when we were both in our 20s. They divorced just as quickly, but for that strange year and a half, we shared a house and a mailbox, and a few quiet looks neither of us ever acknowledged. Daniel and I had always had a certain tension. Nothing improper, just something unspoken. Something we both pretended didn't exist, like the occasional creak of the house settling at night that you tell yourself is just the wind. He was 6 years older than me, with dark eyes that missed nothing and a slow, easy confidence that drove my college friends mad. I remembered him in a towel once, passing from the bathroom to his room, water sliding down his chest, his mouth curved into a smirk when he caught me looking. And now, 25 years later, he was sitting alone, tan and lean, silver at his temples, in a tailored navy suit that hugged his broad shoulders like a second skin. When he turned his head and met my eyes, the breath left my body like someone had pressed a thumb to my diaphragm. After the ceremony, I found myself walking toward him without deciding to. Our hug was tentative at first, then warmer than it should have been. "You haven't changed a bit," he said into my ear. "You're a terrible liar," I laughed, stepping back to study him. "You looked expensive. And you look like trouble," he said. I rolled my eyes, but I felt it. That flicker. That old heat. We sat at the same table during the reception, our chairs angled just slightly inward, as though the room narrowed around us. We spoke in that shorthand you only share with someone who's known you in another life. The way we referred to my mother's old dog, or how he teased me for burning toast every morning back then. Alan was seated 3 chairs down, engrossed in a conversation with our son-in-law's uncle about electric cars. He didn't glance my way once. At one point, Daniel leaned in and brushed something off my collarbone, a petal, maybe, or an invisible excuse, and his thumb lingered just a fraction of a second too long. My skin tingled. I laughed, too loudly. The champagne didn't help. Nor did the soft jazz the band began playing after the cake was cut. Couples drifted onto the dance floor, and Daniel held out his hand. For old time's sake? I hesitated, then let him pull me to my feet. His hand was warm against my back, his breath soft on my cheek as we moved. I could feel the shape of him, the way his body filled the space around me. It was not innocent. Not at all. "Do you remember that night at the lake house?" he murmured. I stiffened. Of course I remembered. One August night, years ago. We'd been sent to my mother's friend's cabin for the weekend while our parents went to a conference. I was 26, still single and pretending to have it all together. He was 32, freshly divorced. We'd stayed up too late, drank cheap wine, and danced barefoot on the deck while cicadas hummed around us. Nothing happened, technically, but the tension that night had been electric. Unbearable. Vaguely, I said, though my cheeks burned. "I think about it sometimes," he said, his voice low. I looked up at him. His eyes were unreadable. "You do?" I always wondered what might have happened if I hadn't gone inside first. A beat passed. My heart thumped. I said nothing. That night, back in the hotel room with Alan, I couldn't sleep. He was snoring lightly, one arm draped over his belly, his face turned toward the wall. The room smelled like aftershave and old cologne. I went into the bathroom, sat on the closed toilet lid, and stared at myself in the mirror. Something had cracked open in me. A door I'd painted shut years ago was suddenly ajar. The next day, Daniel found me by the buffet table. He handed me a mimosa and a napkin. "My number," he said quietly. "In case you want to talk." I didn't say anything. I just folded the napkin and slipped it into my clutch. Back home, the days blurred. Alan returned to his crossword puzzles and predictable routines. I went back to work at the small accounting office I co-owned with a friend. But inside me, something churned. I didn't call Daniel. Not for 2 weeks. And then one afternoon, I did. I called him on a Wednesday. My fingers hovered over his number for a full minute before I pressed call. I told myself it was harmless, that I just wanted to hear his voice again, to see what it would feel like dipping a toe into a lake you know is freezing, but needing to know exactly how cold it is. He answered on the second ring. "Well," he said after a breath. I was starting to think I'd imagined that look in your eyes. I smiled despite myself. "I shouldn't be calling." "Probably not," he said, his voice low and warm. "But I'm glad you did." We talked for nearly an hour. About nothing and everything. His work. He'd retired early from consulting and now ran a small vineyard outside Sonoma. Divorced once, no kids. He still played piano, still had that deep, gravelly laugh I remembered from late nights in our shared kitchen. He asked about my life, but not in the polite way people do out of obligation. He listened, and when I mentioned Alan, there was a pause, subtle but sharp enough to catch. "Are you happy?" he asked. The question sat between us like a dropped dish. "I'm settled," I said, finally. He didn't respond for a moment. "That's not what I asked." I almost hung up. But instead, I said, "I don't know what I'm doing, Daniel." "You don't have to know," he said. "You just have to feel." That sentence clung to me for days. Like smoke in a sweater. We started texting. Little things. A photo of a glass of wine with a caption, "Wishing you were here." A song link. A memory. Nothing overt at first. Just breadcrumb trails of temptation. I'd see his name flash on my phone while Alan snored next to me in bed, or while I sat in traffic, and my stomach would flip in a way I hadn't felt since I was 30. Then came the message. "I'll be in San Diego next weekend. Staying at the Delegate Room 314. No pressure. Just come if you want to see me." I stared at it for hours. Told myself I'd delete it. I didn't. Instead, I found myself packing an overnight bag on a quiet Saturday morning. Alan had gone golfing with his coworkers. I left a note. "Spa day with Claire. Don't wait up." I arrived just after sunset. The Hotel del Coronado glowed with golden light, its towers etched against the pink sky. I walked through the lobby on legs that barely felt attached to my body. My reflection in the brass elevator door looked like someone else entirely, someone braver, or stupider, or both. Room 314. I knocked once. And then he opened the door. He was barefoot, wearing a white shirt unbuttoned at the top and dark jeans that hung low on his hips. His hair was damp from the shower. He looked at me as though I were a dream he wasn't sure would come true. I stepped inside. Neither of us spoke. He closed the door behind me, and I heard the latch click into place. That sound felt more significant than it should have, like crossing a threshold, no going back. He stepped closer, slowly, giving me time to stop him. I didn't. He touched my hair first, then the side of my face. His fingers traced along my jaw like he was remembering something, or confirming it still existed. My breath caught in my throat. "You came," he whispered. "I didn't plan to," I said honestly. "I was hoping you'd lie better than that," he teased, then kissed me before I could reply. It was not a soft, tentative kiss. It was deep, intentional. Years of wondering and restraint poured into a single breathless moment. I melted against him. His hands found my waist, then my hips, then slid up beneath my blouse. My skin came alive under his touch. It had been years, decades, maybe, since someone touched me like that. Like I was something to be unwrapped, devoured, worshipped. We didn't make it to the bed right away. He lifted me onto the desk, pushing aside the notepad and pen like they were irrelevant clutter, his mouth on my neck, my hands tugging at his shirt, legs parting without thought. God, you're still so, he murmured into my collarbone. Don't, I said, breathless. Don't say things unless you mean them. He paused and looked up at me. I've meant everything since the day I met you. That broke me open. We undressed in pieces, savoring each reveal. I was nervous. My body had changed, aged, softened, but he looked at me like I was art. His lips traced every line, every freckle, every curve with reverence. When he finally entered me, it wasn't frantic. It was slow, intimate, almost unbearable in its intensity. He moved inside me like he was rediscovering something he thought he'd lost. I cried out once, quietly, not from pain but from the sheer overwhelming sensation of being truly seen, truly touched after so long. Afterward, we lay tangled together, our breathing gradually sinking. His fingers traced lazy circles on my back. You're not a mistake, he said into the quiet. Even if this is. I didn't answer, because I didn't know what we were. I stayed until dawn, slipped out while he was still sleeping, kissed his shoulder before I left. My phone buzzed as I pulled onto the freeway. Daniel, you looked back at me in the mirror. That's all I needed. I smiled through tears I couldn't explain. Back home, Alan asked nothing. I told him the spa was exactly what I needed. He nodded, already halfway through the newspaper. Life returned to normal. On the surface. But everything had changed. Inside, a fuse had been lit. The next time wasn't planned either. It was 3 weeks later. Daniel was in Los Angeles for a conference, and I was supposed to have dinner with an old friend, but she canceled last minute due to a migraine. At least, that's what I told Alan. In truth, I'd started carrying lingerie in the trunk of my car. Just in case. I texted Daniel around 4 p.m. Me. Are you still in LA? He called me immediately. I'm at the Pendry. Suite 1105. Don't tease me, Claire. I'm already on the freeway, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. This time, when he opened the door, we didn't waste time on pleasantries. I was in his arms before the door had even latched. He kissed me like a man starving, and I responded in kind. We didn't speak much that night. There were no confessions, no guilt. Only need, raw and hungry and urgent. But afterward, as we lay beneath the soft hotel sheets, our limbs tangled like ivy. The quiet crept in. He touched my face gently. You don't talk much afterward. I don't know what to say, I admitted. You can say you want this, he said. That you need it. I do, I said. God help me, I do. That was the truth. I needed him like I needed air. He reminded me that I was still a woman, not just a wife or a mother or an aging silhouette in the bathroom mirror. With Daniel, I didn't have to be sensible or invisible. I could be hungry, desperate, alive. I told myself it wasn't an affair. Not really. I wasn't in love. I was just reclaiming something. But it became more than sex. It became texts in the middle of the night. Long phone calls during lunch breaks. Secret weekends in Paso Robles, Carmel, a cabin in Big Bear. I started to memorize the rhythm of his breathing, the cadence of his laugh. I knew the exact way his fingertips felt when they skimmed the inside of my wrist. I began to crave the sound of my name on his lips more than I craved anything else. Alan noticed something. Eventually. Not a change in my behavior. He never paid enough attention for that. But he started suggesting weekend plans, suddenly remembering anniversaries, even bringing home flowers once just because. It was guilt, I suppose, that made me try again. I let him take me to that new French place downtown. I wore the silk dress he used to like. He reached for my hand across the table, and for a moment, I almost believed we could find our way back. But when he kissed me goodnight, the touch felt like another man's clothes on my skin. Familiar, but wrong. Daniel, by contrast, made me feel like my body was a map he never stopped wanting to explore. He noticed things Alan hadn't in years. How I bit my lip when nervous, the small scar on my left thigh from falling off a bike at 13. He brought me things he knew I liked, an obscure book of poetry, imported chocolate with sea salt, a scarf in a shade of green that matched my eyes. Thoughtful things. Personal things. And then, one afternoon in late October, I made a mistake. It was small. Stupid. I left my phone on the kitchen counter, screen up, while I showered. A message flashed on the screen as I dried off. Daniel, last night is still on my lips. Can't stop thinking of the way you said my name. I heard the water running in the sink downstairs. Heard the silence that followed. When I came down, Alan was sitting at the table. The phone was face down now. He was sipping coffee, his jaw tight. Everything okay? I asked, my voice too bright. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Yep. Everything's fine. He didn't say anything else. Not that day. Not the next. But I knew. Something had shifted. That week, he stayed later at work. Didn't ask where I was going when I left for Pilates. I expected confrontation, but it never came. Just distance. A hollowing out of what was already half empty. Daniel noticed the change in me. You're somewhere else, he said, when we met at his vineyard one rainy Thursday. We were in the guest cottage, curled in front of the fireplace, a blanket over our bare legs. I think Alan knows, I admitted. Daniel looked at me, searching. Do you want him to? I don't know, I said. I don't know what I want anymore. He touched my hand. I know what I want. I didn't reply. Couldn't. Because a terrible truth was forming in my chest. This had never been about just needing to feel alive. Somewhere along the way, I'd started falling in love with him. I left early that night. The drive back was long, and the rain made the freeway blur. I cried quietly in the car, the kind of tears that come when you've let something go too far but can't imagine pulling it back. At home, Alan was asleep. His side of the bed smelled like mouthwash and something faintly antiseptic. I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly above us, and I realized that for the first time in decades, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Not because I didn't belong, but because the version of me who once lived here no longer existed. She had vanished the moment Daniel touched her face and said, "You don't have to know. You just have to feel." And what I felt now was that something had to break. I don't remember the exact moment I realized I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Maybe it was the night I lay awake listening to Alan's steady, oblivious breathing and realized I no longer felt guilt, only sorrow. Not for what I'd done, but for the years I had spent convincing myself that quiet, polite emptiness was what love became after a certain age. That comfort was a fair trade for passion. Or maybe it was the morning Daniel texted me simply, "I want to wake up next to you every day." And I didn't flinch. The problem with double lives is that they start to require double hearts. And mine couldn't keep the beat anymore. I was out of rhythm with everything. Meals tasted flat. Music that once soothed me made me restless. I snapped at Alan for leaving the fridge door open. I cried when I found a picture of us from our 15th anniversary, me in a red dress, laughing at something he'd just whispered. A stranger. Both of us. One night. I went to Daniel's place in Sonoma and stayed for 3 days. We didn't leave the house. We cooked together, took long walks through the vines, made love in every room like we were trying to memorize each other through skin. He played piano while I lay on the rug with a glass of wine, watching his hands move. And when he finished, I whispered, "You make me feel like I'm 30 again." He walked over, kissed the top of my head. "You are. Every time you look at me like that." That night, as we sat outside wrapped in one blanket under the stars, he said, "I don't want to be a secret anymore, Claire. I know it's messy, but I want you to choose. Not out of guilt, out of truth." I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of the future. I felt afraid of the past, of how much time I'd wasted living the right life instead of the real one. 2 days later, I told Alan. I came home on a Tuesday. The house was quiet. He was reading on the patio, glasses low on his nose, sipping iced tea. I sat down across from him and said his name once, softly. He looked up, and something in my face must have told him everything. "I've been seeing someone," I said, "for a while now." He didn't say anything at first. just nodded once, very slowly, as if he'd already known. Is it serious? He asked, voice steady. Yes. He looked down at his tea, then back at me. Is it over between us? I hesitated. And that, more than any word I could have said, answered him. I see, he said quietly. Is it someone I know? I swallowed. Daniel. He blinked. Your stepbrother? I nodded, shame rising like a tide. We're not blood. We were never raised together. It started as, it doesn't matter. I'm sorry, Alan. Truly. But this didn't happen because of him. It happened because I've been gone from this marriage for a long time, and I didn't even realize it. He stared at me for a long moment, and then said something that undid me. I always thought you'd be the one to stay. I didn't cry in front of him. I waited until I was upstairs, packing a suitcase. I sat on the edge of the bed where we'd slept for over 20 years and sobbed silently into my palms. For what we had, for what we lost, for the comfort I was leaving behind. I moved out the next day. Into a small rental not far from Daniel's vineyard, but not with him. Not yet. I needed space to breathe. To figure out who I was without a man on either side of me. The first night alone, I cooked myself a real meal, drank wine barefoot in the kitchen, danced to old Motown while the sauce simmered. I slept in the middle of the bed. The silence was different than I imagined. It wasn't lonely. It was wide open. Daniel respected my space. He didn't push, but he came over on Sundays, brought flowers, groceries, new music for me to hear. We made love slowly, tenderly, without rush. He held me like something fragile, not because I was broken, but because he understood I'd rebuilt myself. Alan and I divorced quietly.
No scouting.
No fights over property. We both knew there wasn't a villain in the story, just time, erosion, choices unmade. He wished me well, and I meant it when I wished the same for him. I saw him once, 6 months later, with a woman at the farmer's market. They were laughing over peaches, and he looked lighter somehow. I hoped she was teaching him how to see things again. I hoped he saw her. As for Daniel and me, we're still writing whatever this is. It's not perfect. We argue sometimes. We both carry our scars. But there's laughter. There's touch. There's fire. He still plays piano for me, and I still wear that green scarf he gave me, the one that makes me feel like someone's muse. And sometimes, when I wake up before him and watch him sleeping, his hand resting lightly over my stomach, our legs intertwined, I think about how close I came to never knowing this life could be mine. To living only the version of my life that looked right on paper. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. We get one shot. One short, strange, beautiful life. And if someone or something lights a fire in you that won't go out, you owe it to yourself to step toward it. Even if it makes no sense. Even if it's complicated. Even if you have to tear down the house to build the home you were meant to live in. Because desire doesn't ask for permission. And love, real love, doesn't always show up when it's convenient. But when it does, you'll know. And if you're brave, you'll answer it. Like I did.